The New World Translation printed by Jehovah's Witnesses includes the word other 5 times in Colossians chapter 1. For instance, in verse 16, where speaking of Jesus, it says, "Because by means of him all other things were created." Other Bible translations do not include the word other, and the New World Translation is accused of bias by adding the word other to enforce the meaning that Jesus is a created being rather than an uncreated creator or part of a trinity. To highlight why they think this is a problem, critics will often quote scriptures such as Revelation chapter 22, which warn of grave consequences for anyone adding or taking away from scripture. This video presentation will give a defense and show how it is not only reasonable and justified to include the word other in the scriptural text, but also how it is in fact free from bias. Please note that whilst this video will touch on the meaning of Jesus being the firstborn of creation, a deeper consideration of this topic and more will be saved for future presentations. Now we will focus on defending the inclusion of the word other by looking at how translations are made, where and when it is appropriate to add words, and a lesson in translating Greek from the Apostle Paul. As critics point out, the Greek in Colossians chapter 1 verses 16 to 18 does not include the word other. Allos and heteros are both used to mean other in the Greek and are used several times in the Bible. However, it is true that neither heteros or allos are used in Colossians chapter 1 verses 16 to 18. So with this being the case, how can the word other be included in the English translation? If you've ever learned a new language, you will know that translating between languages involves a lot more than a simple one-for-one word exchange, and Bible translation is no different. Indeed, this is obvious as can be seen by looking at word counts of different Bible translations for Colossians chapter 1, which reveals a wide variation, all of which is different to the Greek. This does not mean all these differences are due to biases, or that the translators are trying to change the doctrinal meanings of the verses to suit their particular ideologies. However, one thing to note is that the word other is added several times in many translations. For instance, in Acts chapter 5, the apostles had continued their preaching activity despite orders to the contrary, and in giving an explanation, several Bible translations read, "Peter and the other apostles." The word other is not contained in the Greek, but is added. The reason being that Peter is an apostle, so if it read Peter and the apostles, this sounds like Peter is not an apostle. So reading Peter and the other apostles makes it explicit that we're talking about all the apostles and Peter is in that group. Hence, it is more clear to the reader. Going back to Colossians chapter 1, this contains all. The Greek is panta, derived from pas. Note what is said in Young's Concordance about all. Some particles, such as all, are frequently used for some or most. Backing this up is commentary from BeDuhn, who says that all is commonly used in Greek as hyperbole. The other is assumed. A good example of this is in Luke chapter 11. When Jesus was rebuking the Pharisees, he says, "Woe to you, Pharisees, because you give God 1/10 of your mint, rue, and all other kinds of garden herbs." Here the other has been added and does not appear in the original Greek. However, mint and rue were widely known as being herbs, so similar to the case with Peter and the other apostles, adding other makes sense here too, and many translations do add it. In fact, not only have scholars made this use of all apparent, but the Apostle Paul does too in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, where it reads, "For he has put everything under his feet." Here everything is panta, or all things from the Greek word pas. Look how Paul continues. He says, "Now when it says that everything has been put under him, it is clear that this does not include God himself, who put everything under Christ." So according to Paul, it's clear that all things or everything has an exception. In this instance, that God putting everything under Christ, God is not included in the all things that put under Christ. The second point of note is that God counts as a thing. Therefore, if we were to take Colossians chapter 1 verse 16 literally, without the word other, then if Christ created all things, that would have to mean Christ created himself and his Father, which simply doesn't make any sense. As Jason BeDuhn says, other is implied in all, and the New World Translation simply makes what is implicit explicit. You can argue whether it is necessary or not to do this, but I think the objections that have been raised to show it is, in fact, necessary, because those object want to negate the meaning of the phrase firstborn of creation. If adding other prevents this misreading of the biblical text, then it is useful to have it there.